All right, so what is the Kalaam cosmological argument? What's it trying to say? How does it work? It sounds kind of crazy. Okay, so the Kalaam cosmological argument actually dates back a long time, as in before 1000 AD. It was a Muslim argument, believe it or not. This is back when the Muslims were largely following Aristotle, Plato, a lot of philosophy. And you had some very strong thinkers in this whole philosophical realm and theological realm. And so they were actually debating the question of God's existence, but not trying to say that he either exists or he doesn't exist. Instead, trying to debate the question of, did the universe always exist? Did it only come into existence? What does that have implications for God's existence? What does this all mean? Well, I'm not going to give a really super high level scholarly presentation or defense of this argument. That's William Lane Craig's job, and he has done a really good job of it, seeing as it's kind of like his life's work. So I'll leave that to him. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and boil it down for us average people and see if this argument makes sense to us. But let's start off with the question of, what does an atheist have to believe about the age of the universe? And what does a theist, Christian, Muslim, doesn't matter, monotheist, omnipotent God kind of variety, what must that person believe about the age of the universe? Well, historically speaking, an atheist can't really deal with the question of, if the universe began, then how do you explain that? Traditionally, an atheist would have to claim that the universe came into existence. Oh wait, if you said that, what caused it to come into existence? Oh, that doesn't make any sense. Wouldn't it have to, the universe can't create itself out of nothing. Oh, I know how we can solve it. Field theory, no, quantum mechanics, stuff can pop in and out of existence at will. Oh, cool, but wouldn't I have to have existence first? Oh, shoot. Now I'm pretty much stuck with the universe had to always exist. If you're an atheist, you're kind of stuck with the belief that the universe, or at least some universe, if we're just a part of another universe, whatever it is, whatever all of reality is, whatever the whole universe is, it has to have always existed. Because if it didn't exist, then you get the pesky little question of, then how does something come from nothing? I mean, imagine this. Imagine if the universe did come into existence. Well, if space and time, all of reality, space and time, didn't exist, then how exactly would it start existing outside of an omnipotent being? Wouldn't you first need time? Because if it doesn't exist, then you don't have time. So you don't have time for it to start existing. You don't have space for it to start existing. So even if you get down to quantum mechanics and you're trying to look at electrical fields or anything else for that matter, energy fields, etc., you can't have stuff popping into existence unless you first have a universe for it to pop into, or something for it to pop into, and you need time for that to happen. But you have neither. So you literally have nothing, nada, not a thing. If you have nothing, you will never have something. You just can't have it. And so the only option left is to say that the universe, or something, has always existed. Something that can account for the universe has always existed. Theists say, no, that thing that accounts for the universe existing is an omnipotent being, God. Atheists would say, no, not a God, just it's always been here. It's always been here. Okay. But what about the Christian? Does the Christian have to believe that the universe began to exist? Well, there's been a lot of debate over the years. In fact, a lot more Christians and non-Christians, Muslims, have even said, we don't need a beginning to the universe to still have a God. In fact, a lot of them actually rely upon God has always existed, and thus the universe has always existed as the created order. Now, how does that work? In fact, the philosophical school of thought with the ancient Muslim philosophers, they even follow this line of thinking. And they said, essentially, if God is omnipotent, the greatest thing imaginable, sustaining, creating at all times, like his nature is simply his nature, or I'm just using male pronoun, it could be her nature, its nature, it doesn't really matter to me, don't care. Whatever God's nature is will be what always is. It doesn't change because it would be outside of time. You don't really change if you're outside of time, whatever that means. So this God would, if the nature is creative, then it would always be creative. Sustainer, always be sustaining. Loving, always be loving. Angry, always be angry. Whatever it is, it would always be the nature of this being. Thus, if you have an outside of space and time being that is by definition creative, then you would expect there to be creation at all times, in which case the universe would be infinitely old. But then you have others, like that push the Kalaam argument, that says that no, if there is a God, then you must have a beginning of the universe, initiation of this creating action. And even back in this time period, they kind of had a little bit of a warring faction thing going on. But needless to say, Christians historically have followed the line of thinking, and so have a lot of Muslims, that the universe may have began out of nothing. It may not have begun out of nothing. Either way, God is the creator and sustainer out of everything, and he simply uses his own power to do it. So keep that in mind. If an atheist proves that the universe did not begin, it's not like that denies theism. But if a theist, Christian, Muslim, somebody with an omnipotent God, if they prove that the universe did begin, had to have begun, the atheist position is pretty much dead in the water at this point because there is no explanatory power for how that could be the case. So the Kalaam argument is trying to do that. Prove that the universe began. Okay, so how is it going to do that? I will give you a warning right up front. If you're a mathematician, if you're a physicist that specializes in mathematics and so forth, if you're just kind of bent that way, this argument is going to make steam come out of your ears and it's going to make you go nuts. And I'm going to warn you, you have to stop thinking in abstract mathematical terms. This is going to be more in real tangible world terms, in thought, not in the abstract. Because again, this is a cosmological argument. You're dealing with the nature of the cosmos itself, which I know I hear you. Yeah, but it's all mathematical. Kind of. I mean, yes, most of our theories and laws and everything else are going to be expressed mathematically. But at the end of the day, the nature of it in and of itself, not fully explained in that way properly. It's more of a kind of good enough scenario. As proof of this, I'll give you Zeno's paradox. How in the world can you get from this point to this point? Well, easy, you would say. You just kind of walk from one point to another, right? True, but Zeno points out that from this point to this point, it has a midpoint right here. And that midpoint has another midpoint there, and from these 2 points. Oh man. All right, so do those midpoints have midpoints? Yes. In fact, how many midpoints? Infinite midpoints. And so Zeno says if there are infinite midpoints, how long would it take you to get from here to here? If it takes time to go through a point, and there are infinite midpoints, or points in general, how long would it take you to get from here to here? Oh, that's right, an infinite amount of time, in which case you couldn't move anywhere, because to get from here to the first midpoint, there's an infinite number of midpoints there too. In which case, you can't move anywhere. Motion is not possible, is what he is claiming. Now, there's a complicated reason as to why he was saying this. It has to do with his, master Parmenides, and that's a whole different topic. I'll tackle that in a different video. But needless to say, the answer to this problem has nothing to do with some sort of a mathematical equation. It has everything to do with realizing that reality itself is not made up of points. It's made up of fluid substance. It's one fluid substance, a monistic singular fluid substance. It's not broken up into infinite points. So infinity can help us, especially with curvature and things like that. But at the end of the day, infinity does have to reach its limit on, the irony of that statement, has to reach its limit on the real world application to a certain degree, in a manner of speaking, philosophically. So let's walk through this argument. Number one, you cannot add or subtract to or from infinity. Again, this is where the mathematicians are screaming at me, and I'm getting angry, all caps, stuff in the comment section, etc. We do infinity sets all the time. We do infinity squared. I get it. I know. But why don't you solve this one for me? Let's take a cow. Can you have infinite cows? No, there's not infinite space. So you can't have an infinity in reality? Can you have an infinity number of particles? Can you have an infinity number of computers? No, we haven't manufactured. Okay. But you couldn't fit them anyway. Okay, so this is how we would phrase, you can't have a realized infinity. In other words, I can maybe be moving on my way to infinity, especially since you'll never actually reach it. Like it's, hey, keep going, keep going. It's like infinity's not even a number. It's kind of instructions. Don't stop, right? The moment you realize an infinity is the moment you realize that you haven't reached infinity because you have to keep going. So you can never actually realize an infinity at all. And even if you could, this argument claims that you couldn't add or subtract to it because it would mean you didn't have infinity to start with if you could, in some meaningful way, add to it as if that increases the value, or pull away from it as if that somehow decreases the value. So in other words, adding or subtracting to infinity in a philosophical context means, well, you didn't have infinity in the first place. Otherwise, you can't add or subtract to it. One of those two. Nonetheless, point number one seems to be valid. To further show what I mean by mathematics has limited application within the real world, and I don't mean this in a way that's going to stop people from doing mathematics and physics. Massively important for you to keep doing that. In fact, we have computers because you do mathematics and it actually has application in the real world. We have spaceships because you have applications in the real world. We sent stuff to Mars because there's application in the real world. It's vitally important to do mathematics. But you have to understand the limitations within mathematics and the language and the application of. Okay, so think about this. I have a cow. I don't really have a cow, but let's say I have a cow. I have a cow. I lose 2 of my cows. How many cows do I have? Well, that statement didn't really make a lot of sense. I guess if it made sense, I would have negative 1 cow. Okay, so what does a negative 1 cow look like? Doesn't it mean I owe you a cow? Haven't we brought in the concept of IOUs or abstract concepts in order for that to even have a representation, and it can't ever have a physical representation? You can't have a negative cow, I don't think, unless this world is a lot stranger than I thought it was. So again, I'm just trying to get you to understand there are limited applications within the question of infinity, limited applications within the question of mathematics, and application to that. Not denying mathematics. Please do not send the hate mail to me on that. But you should be able to get what I'm trying to say. Let's go to point number 2. So point number 2 says, if the universe existed for an infinite amount of time, let's use days for example, then every day that comes to pass adds time, or days to an already infinite number. Okay, so let's just take days just as an arbitrary number. It doesn't really matter what number it is. We'll just take rotations of the Earth in a typical 24-hour setting. Well, if the universe has existed for an infinite amount of time, that means there would have been infinite arbitrary time units. We'll just call days, just out of convenience. Okay. Arbitrary symmetrical time units, same time. But wait a minute. If there's already been an infinite number of days, then if I add a day in the future, then haven't I done something impossible? Because I added to infinity, but if I add to infinity in a meaningful way, then it wasn't infinity to begin with because I didn't change the value. How does that work out? Well, it works out because the universe isn't infinitely old, according to the Kalaam argument. This doesn't actually work out at all, in fact. The universe must have begun, because if it didn't begin, then it would be infinitely old. And if it was infinitely old, then you would be able to do impossible things like add days to an infinite number of days, or add time units to an infinite number of time units. But again, that's impossible. So I guess we're left with the universe began, and therefore atheism's wrong and God has to exist. Hey! This is the Kalaam cosmological argument. The universe began. It had to have begun at some point in the past, billions of years, million years, thousands of years, trillions of years, who knows, who cares? It cannot be infinitely old, because if it is, you are doing impossible things with time and space. such as adding units of time to an already infinite number of units of time. And that's impossible. So there you go. God must exist. Now, what are some of the counter arguments to this, other than people freaking out on topic or point number one? Well, the biggest argument that I've come to against this one would be a very clever one, using back to Zeno. Remember I said time and space is one fluid substance? How do you break up one substance into infinite discrete units? Are you really adding to infinity at all if all it is just one substance stretching infinitely? Space and time stretching infinitely as the universe expands and whatever else it does? Doesn't that negate the entire argument? I would argue no, it doesn't. It's a good thought, but not quite. Because if you say, now the universe substance is this large, time is this stretched, and then in the future, which by the way doesn't actually exist, oh boy, A theory, B theory, we'll talk about that at a different time. If you say at this point right now it's this, so the substance is this large, and then at some point in the future it's that large, then a meaningful change in value has taken place. And if a change in value or change in size or age or whatever you want to call it has taken place, then suddenly the Kalaam argument applies again, because this change in value or this change in size or this change in age will go on infinitely. And then the next day you would just be adding more, or the next movement. It would be infinitely disproving itself, in a manner of speaking. Okay, so that's the Kalaam cosmological argument. I would find this argument to be valid, but I've not found it to be the most profound to a lot of people. I have engaged in discussion with a lot of people and had some success with this, but it really does have its limitations when you're dealing with mathematically minded people. I know I keep going back to that, and that's okay. Not every single argument is going to catch everybody's mind and eye, and it's not every one of them is going to really convince everybody of whatever it is you're trying to convince them of. And like I said, William Lane Craig also is considered maybe the best person in history to ever deal with this, at least in the modern history. And so I would direct you to his books and his lectures on this particular subject. But hopefully you understand a little bit more about this particular argument and applications, counter arguments, and how to respond and all that kind of stuff. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you think that I am crazy, that's okay. Let me know why. That's the key. Always got to have a good reason as to why. Explain to me why this argument is correct, incorrect. I'd love to see your feedback. All right, talk to you later.